What's up everybody? On this location guide we're going to be talking about my recent trip to the amazing Scotland, land of bagpipes, kilts, haggis, Braveheart, and also amazing landscapes, something I wasn't fully expecting because we all know about Isle of Skye from many movies, but there is so much to see in Scotland. On this location guide we're going to be covering logistics, how to get there, how to get around, lodging, where to stay, and then of course the locations, what time to get there, how to get there, everything pertinent to photography as far as the locations. So let's dive right in. So as the video is titled, a lot of this advice is going to be relevant to going to Scotland in the winter. I went there at the beginning of December, but a lot of this is location advice, so it could apply to other times of the year. But when we're on the subject, arriving there in the winter, there are pros and cons, right? So if you go in the winter, obviously this is the low season and there's not going to be a lot of people around. That's going to be a big pro, because in the summer and in the spring, I believe, there is crazy amounts of people. A lot of these locations are pretty popular, especially Isle of Skye. So if you go in the winter, you're going to have none of those issues. What you will have is problems with the weather, of course, because this is Scotland, this is the UK, and the weather is very unpredictable. So when I booked my trip, I did it a few months in advance, and then I was checking the forecast as the date was approaching, and pretty much every single day that I was going to be there, it was forecasted to rain, like more than 50%. You know, it was very depressing when I looked at it. But somehow, for some reason, I just went ahead anyways, and as I arrived, it was not as rainy, but then I started driving certain locations and it would rain. And so what I found out is if you do go in the winter, you probably won't have to deal with snow or very cold conditions, because from what I hear, Scotland is somewhere situated as high on the latitude as it is. It's situated somewhere where we have certain trade winds that kind of give it a more temperate climate. That means it really never got that cold, probably just about freezing on some very few days, few mornings. And it snowed at a few locations that I went to, but really nothing, especially compared to such locations that I've been to like Alaska. So definitely bring your warm clothes to bundle up, but I wouldn't worry about it too much as far as like extreme cold, Arctic cold we're talking here. But definitely bring rain gear, because it will definitely be raining in the winter. It is known for that, and certain regions will be more rainy than others. And as I found out, even if it's forecasted to rain in a certain area or certain city, you really have to pay attention to the weather. Use the Weather Channel app or whatever weather apps you use, and just see where the rain clouds and the rain itself is going to be falling in what region, and then you can plan accordingly. Maybe go to a different region, and different times of the day it can be sunny and rainy. So it's really unpredictable, and it's one of the things you're going to have to deal with if you go there in the winter. Additionally, we're going there in the winter. It's very high in the latitude as mentioned, and the days are incredibly short. When I was there, sun was rising around 8:45, maybe 8:30 at the earliest, which it got progressively later towards the winter solstice, December 21st. And then the sun set at about, I would want to say around 3 p.m., 2:30, 2:45-ish. So if you consider, you know, driving to certain locations, where you're staying and all that, you would have very limited amount of hours, and I was extremely stressed shooting sunrise here, maybe spending too much time. If it was a mountainous region, the sun didn't clear the mountains until later in the sunrise, then rushing over to the next location. Maybe there was a hike involved, barely getting there in time. So needless to say, it is very stressful to go there in the winter as far as getting things done in the certain amount of days that you have there. So I would plan for more days than usual when it comes to these trips. I usually do about 10 days. But on hindsight, I probably should have done more than 15, something like that, maybe a few extra days, and stay in certain areas, just a few more days, just in case there's different weather conditions, and also for just to have enough time to visit all these amazing places. Because you'll be driving around, and it's like Iceland, and you'll see amazing things left and right, coastlines and mountains and valleys and all this stuff, and you want us to stop and take photos everywhere. So yeah, there's a lot to see in Scotland for sure. When it comes to arriving in Scotland, I of course did this sort of towards the end. I want to say, depending on when you see this video, it was sort of towards the end of the pandemic lockdowns, very strict COVID restrictions, and getting tested even via the vaccine, and sending in your COVID test. So I'm not really going to talk about that because that was a very stressful part of the journey, because I had to mail in some COVID tests and tested before coming back to the US. But that aside, if you're getting to Scotland, you're either going to fly into Edinburgh or Glasgow. Those are the two biggest cities. And from there, drive up to the Scottish Highlands where all the beautiful landscapes are. There are some stuff closer, but the majority of things are up in the Highlands. Now, when it comes to driving, of course, we're talking about the UK here, and they drive on that side of the road. And if you're renting a car, most of the cars are going to be manual. So you're going to be sitting on this side, driving on that side, shifting with your left hand. So pretty much everything is reversed. And I'm not going to lie, it is kind of tricky at the beginning. You're a little bit nervous. Especially when you're leaving the airport, you just got your rental car, you got these roundabouts, and you're going around the roundabouts on the opposite way that you would, if you were anywhere else in Europe. And then figuring out, I'm not really a big fan of roundabouts in general because I never really know which lane to get into for which exit I'm leaving. And when I'm looking at the GPS, I'm even more confused. So add to that the fact that you're sitting on the opposite side of the car, shifting with your opposite hand. And so, yeah, driving a stick shift is a must. You can rent an automatic car. And if you're really nervous about this, I would recommend paying more and getting an automatic car just to not be having an extra level of stress to deal with apart from the driving. As usual, I do not recommend tour buses and going by public transportation because it's really not conducive to, arriving to places for photography at sunrise or staying late for sunset and all the things that we like to do as photographers. So definitely drive, maybe get an automatic car, and it's a little tricky, but it's not as bad as you think it is. You'll eventually get used to it. And you really only have a little bit of trouble on the very narrow roads with the large semi-trucks passing you on the opposite side. And it can get a little hairy in those situations. But overall, I really didn't have any serious issues. I did slide on the ice at one point because I was going a little too fast. I was skidding around a turn. And then I maybe hit a curb at some point because I wasn't sure how far I was to either side because obviously I'm used to looking at the opposite side. But all that aside, give it a shot. It's an adventure at least, and just get full insurance for your rental car. Additionally, remember there's not going to be a lot of off-roading, so maybe get a larger vehicle if you're traveling with more people, but all the roads are paved and you're not going to be going off-roading, so you can get by with a regular car or these little tiny cute SUVs that they have out there in Europe. So while you're driving around the Highlands, some of these very narrow roads are pretty much only wide enough to let one vehicle go by. So you'll see plenty of these little pullouts on the left and the right as you're making your way there. And so apparently the common courtesy is whoever reaches their pullout first allows the next person to go. So even if you've maybe been the first one to go, the last 3 cars that drove by, and for some reason you feel a little guilty, and so you want to, after they pull into the pullout, you want to get in the pullout and tell them to keep going, they'll actually almost be irritated because you're sort of wasting their time because they already pulled over. So don't feel selfish. It's pretty much whoever gets to the pullout first allows the other car to go by. There is no you go, no you go, no you go. No. You're going to irritate some people out there as I found, which I don't really know if I irritated them, but you can kind of see as they're driving by, they're not exactly smiling. So pull over if you're the first one there, let the other person go by, and if you do this at night, actually, the common courtesy is to pull over and then blink your lights. And then as you go by the person who has pulled over for you, maybe give your headlights a little blip as a thank you. I'm not really sure if this is something that is considered, but I just didn't want to go by, like you can't see somebody waving at night, which during the day you could just wave to them, but at night I just wanted to give a little register of like, thank you for pulling over for me. But yeah, that's a little kind of road common courtesy situation you'll encounter as you're driving in the Highlands. Now, as far as where to base out of the Highlands, when you arrive, whether at Glasgow or Edinburgh, I first headed to a town called Fort William. It's one of the larger towns in the Highlands, and I believe it is about a little bit more than 3 hours from Edinburgh, a little bit less than 3 hours from Glasgow, so depends if you're going to be staying there one night and then driving. I just drove straight away, and I got there on the night of the first flight that I arrived there. Another pro as far as visiting in the winter, the low season, is that things are a lot cheaper, there's more availability, and to be honest, it was almost scary or creepy, some of these hostels we stayed at, because there was literally nobody else there. Some of the hostels were decently full, But in some of the larger cities, for some reason, we stayed at the hostels, and me and my friend, we were the only ones there. So I guess you'll have the place to yourself, you'll have the kitchen to yourself, which is always a plus as far as hostels. So that is definitely a pro visiting in the low season in the winter. In some of the smaller towns, there might not be hostels. I believe in one of the towns up north, I believe it was Wick, we stayed at an Airbnb, and the cheapest one we found was actually some kind of like bed and breakfast kind of deal over a bar. That worked out just fine, relatively cheap. I believe is around £20. And other than that, we stayed at a lot of hostels. Now, when we're talking about cheap, also keep in mind currency. The currency exchange is not in the favor of the US dollar. I don't know what the exchange is exactly right now because it fluctuates, but definitely got less pounds for my dollar. And things are on the cheaper side, so it's not the equivalent of what you would pay for in dollars that you would pay for in pounds. But yeah, you do lose a little bit on the exchange for sure. We didn't eat at too many restaurants, though we did when we were staying on our last night at Glasgow. You know, the usual fish and chips, kind of the UK thing, English more than Scottish actually. But purchasing food at the supermarkets and then cooking at the hostel worked out just fine. Not really exorbitant with the prices there as far as the groceries and all that. Now let's get on to the fun stuff, the locations. So I'm going to sort of cover this in the way that I did my road trip, where I based out of and the locations nearby. So after landing in Edinburgh, I drove out to Fort William, and the first area I visited was the Glencoe Valley. There's a town called Glencoe, and then there's the Glencoe Valley. You'll recognize this definitely from maybe Skyfall, the James Bond movie, and it's also featured in numerous other movies. It's a really magnificent valley. Everywhere you're driving, you're surrounded by these epic mountains, and there's like little waterfalls here and there, and there's a few locations that we'll talk about specifically here, but just overall, the Glencoe Valley was quite an amazing area. If you want to get some drone stuff, pretty cool, following the car, get that classic James Bond kind of shot. I got some ideas from some movies, of course, but it's a very amazing location. Also good for wildlife. You'll find these certain kind of deer that live out there. So if you're into wildlife photography, it's a good location. Just bring your extra long telephoto lens, of course. The sort of landmark in the Glencoe area is the Ben Nevis Mountain, but it's mostly known for hiking. People want to make it up to the top. I wouldn't say that there's any good views. Well, there probably is views, but nothing very specific as far as photography is concerned. I didn't really see anything that caught my eye, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you're into hiking or something, the Ben Nevis is the most famous one in that area. So on my first morning in the area, I visited the famous mountain of Buachaille Etive Mor. I'm trying to do the names as best as I can because they're very difficult to pronounce. You'll see the names here written. The best shot of Buachaille Etive Mor is actually from another mountain directly across from it called Bowfiddle, I believe. And it's about 35 minutes from Fort William, where I was basing out of. And then from there, you find a car park, sort of the car park actually to the Buachaille Etive Mor. But of course, to get a view of that mountain, you climb the opposite one. So you park in the same parking lot. Car park is what they call them out there. And then you make the hike up. You'll see sort of the trail after these. There's like a little forested area and a house. And you'll see sort of the trail going up. There's a fence you have to unlock. And there's a few trails going up. So you'll kind of figure it out as you go. It's going to be a little difficult in the dark. I did it somehow with the headlamp and sort of scrambled my way up there. It's about an hour hike, I would say, to the absolute top, but I set up some time lapses part of the way because the light was already coming up and I didn't want to miss it. And then once I got to the top, it was pretty snowed over and kind of cold actually, and windy. I was decently prepared. I believe I didn't have my neck warmer, my neck gaiter, so either way, I was able to deal with it, so it's nothing too crazy. Magnificent view from up there. You can see valley off in this direction, the mountain straight in front of you, and then a valley off in the other direction. And with the clouds, with the light coming over the valley, probably a little bit later sunset than what it's supposed to be because it has to clear the mountains. But you get some epic views from out there, great for drone flying, though my drone, that was my first day there, so I didn't have it set up. I had some technical issues, so I didn't really get any drone stuff. But awesome spot, would recommend this, definitely save it for one of the good sunrises. As you're entering the Glencoe Valley, there's going to be a small waterfall. You're probably going to miss it unless you actually have the directions on the map, but it's called Coe River Waterfall. Very small waterfall. As you're driving down the road, you'll see a sort of dirt small road off to the left. You make that turn and you'll see sort of the river and the waterfall off to the left of the road there. And nothing too crazy, you know, it's a tiny little waterfall, but you do have the valley and the mountains in the background. So with a little bit of a long exposure, lower angle, getting down close to the waterfall, you can get a pretty cool shot over there. It was a particularly moody sunrise when I went there, really no sunrise at all, and it was raining, so I had to time my shots. But even the moody shots that you get in the Glencoe Valley are pretty awesome. I don't know, I would take either one, honestly. Maybe I do prefer golden sunrises, but some people like these moody shots, and you can definitely find quite a few of those kind of angles and shots in the Glencoe Valley. So the Coe River Waterfall is a quick one to visit, maybe late sunrise or maybe on the way to a sunset location. Additionally, while I was driving, every time I left for a location and came back, because the days were so short, I pretty much left in the dark and arrived in the dark. So during the day, I missed a lot of what was around actual Fort William, which I found out later in the trip as we were driving through is an amazing location in itself. There are lakes surrounding it, lochs as they call them in Scotland, and plenty of opportunities for different kind of lake kind of compositions there. There's Loch Lynn, where I got one of the sunsets where I kind of ran out of time and just had to find a nearby location, just a shot looking across the lake. And there's a few locations such as these where you just kind of have the lake and the distant mountains, and a lot of opportunities for that around Fort William. So there's a road you'll see on the map called Skyfall Road, named after the James Bond movie Skyfall, where they shot that scene, obviously. It's actually called Glen Etive Road in reality, but it's also labeled as Skyfall Road on Google Maps, so you'll find it either way. And then there's numerous small waterfalls on this road. I did a stop at the Skyfall Waterfall, and wouldn't say another one of those waterfalls that isn't particularly epic, but with the background scenery, long exposure, you can find some cool compositions there. I found some stuff with a tree nearby, and just, it was another one of those moody days, and I got some distant, long telephoto shots, moody Glencoe Valley shots, which are always worth getting if that's what the day gives you. Now, a pretty awesome waterfall that you'll find sort of in the Glencoe Valley area, though you take a different road, you actually take a road that goes to the Ben Nevis car park, is the Steall Waterfall. This is a 400-foot waterfall, so now we're talking something kind of epic, pretty big as far as waterfalls go. And you actually park in the Ben Nevis car park. The car park itself is about 20 minutes from Fort William, so it's pretty close. There's actually two of them. You'll see the sign. One is telling you this is not the trail to Steall Falls, so you'll kind of figure it out as you get there, but if you put that in your GPS, you'll find the way there. It's about a 40-minute hike, basically 20 minutes in each direction. There's also another small waterfall that you can see from the parking lot where I got some pretty cool drone shots flying down there. And from there you can choose to make the hike down to Steall Falls. And once you reach it, you'll start to see it along the hiking trail. And you can either take a long shot with a telephoto lens. There's a small river that goes there that's kind of deep. You can't really walk through the river, though it seems like it at some points. Or what you can do is take this cable wire bridge. It's basically three cables, three wires that go across the river. Not anything crazy as far as the river, but it is deep, and you're probably going to be wearing your camera gear. So do it carefully. Don't really do it when it's raining. It was raining when I was making my way back, so I did it extra carefully on the way back. But you grab your hands on the two rails, and then you sort of scoot along this one rail. And if you're fairly agile, you can do it no problem, and that will take you across the river, and then you can walk down to the actual base of the waterfall if you want that looking up shot, which I did. And actually it started raining just as I got there, so I had to snap it real quick and then maybe kind of Photoshop out some of the water drops that were hitting the lens. But definitely worth it, because you know the shot from across the river is okay, but you know when it comes to waterfalls, you want to get as close as you can and get the wide angle lens and get that epic shot from down there on the base. A little bit tricky though, because there's some scraggle near the base of the waterfall, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. Also in the Glencoe Valley area, if you are into FPV drones, you will find some epic waterfalls and just kind of mountains to do all these crazy dives. I got a lot of them on my first day and on second to last day of my trip, and really depends on the weather actually, but you can send your FPV drones all the way up and do some awesome mountain surfing, cruising down these waterfalls, because what I found on this trip, and it's a learning process, this whole thing with the FPVs, is that you don't really want a steep waterfall for an FPV dive. You want something that's more kind of slanted, a little bit of an incline, and just really, really long of a waterfall. And you'll find numerous of those in Glencoe Valley, and you can send your drone all the way up there and just cruise down, get some really epic stuff, which I did quite a few of those, and always a good time when it comes to FPVs in the Glencoe area. Nearby, not exactly in Glencoe, is the Glenfinnan Viaduct. You'll recognize this as the famous bridge and train from Harry Potter. Very popular for people who are, fans of the movie. But unfortunately, I must say, if you go in the winter, you will not be seeing the train. It does not run in the winter. You might want to go to get a shot of the bridge, and I don't know if that's worth it, but I personally didn't visit it, because if I did, it would be to get the train in the shot. So just something to keep in mind if that's one of the things that you had on your list to see. Let's move on to the most famous area in the Scottish Highlands, the Isle of Skye. Now, people may recognize certain locations here from many movies, such as Prometheus, the BFG, a whole bunch that have Scotland as their location. But it's definitely an awesome place, worth visiting, worth spending quite a few days of your trip here, because there are numerous spots to hit here. And then, of course, like I said, in the low season, you're not going to run into too many people. There are some hikers and stuff that I ran into, but I had a lot of these locations to myself. As far as where to base out of on the Isle of Skye, the biggest city and the capital of the area is called Portree. There's also another small town, but it's what's considered a city. It's called Broadford, and that's actually where I stayed. Broadford is closer probably to the main bridge. Portree is more on the actual island there, more further in, so it'll be further or closer to some locations depending on where you stay, but either one works. It probably adds another extra half an hour if you're visiting the further north locations. Not really that big of a deal. I think it was cheaper to stay at Broadford. I'm not sure exactly why I chose that location, but there was a nice hostel there, and that's where I stayed. One thing to keep in mind is that the Isle of Skye is on the west side, so it's exposed to everything coming in from the coast. So when there's bad weather in the Highlands, Isle of Skye is probably going to get the worst of it. So just keep that in mind. That's another reason why you should plan for several days there, just in case you can't make it to some locations, which is actually what happened to me on one of the days. It was some really wet, sloppy snow coming down and pretty much ruined my plans for that day. So actually, before we get into the Isle of Skye locations, there is a castle that is sort of on the way there. It's called Eilean Donan. Very popular. I believe it was closed at the time due to COVID, and I didn't actually visit it because just from what I hear, it has to be a certain time of the day. The tide has to be low. They don't allow drones, though I did see a lot of drone shots. You can get some cool shots there. It lights up at night, and maybe part of the reason why I didn't visit it is because it's sort of a maintained castle. So when it's very touristy and maintained like that, it's not really that much of an appeal for me. But definitely, if you're kind of passing by, it's worth a little stop and just get a few shots there. One of my favorite areas in the Isle of Skye was the Quiraing. It's about an hour and 10 minutes from Broadford and about 35 minutes from Portree. The Quiraing is a rather large area, of which the main viewpoint you'll actually see from the parking lot, and it looks off down the trail, and you have all these strange rock formations, kind of volcanic looking. It really looks very otherworldly, like you're on a completely different planet. Just really awesome for flying drones, just exploring. Really amazing location. One thing to keep in mind though is that, and I only found this out later because I began my hike for sunrise, so most of the beginning was in the dark, that the more photogenic, let's say, locations are sort of towards the first half of the trail, because the trail goes in through the valley, and then you come back around over the mountain. And that last part is kind of tricky because it's very slippery, and in the winter things are snow, rain, things are melting, it's muddy. But I digress. It is an amazing hike. I would recommend maybe scouting it out either a day before, or just overall just making a day of it, because it can be shot at sunrise or sunset. There's a variety of angles and different kind of shots and compositions that you can make there. But if you make the hike, I would almost recommend doing the hike in and then out sort of from the same direction. It's a 2-hour hike, or it's supposed to be a 2-hour hike, just going all the way around non-stop. But I was making constant stops and flying with the FPV drone and setting up time lapses and all that. So I probably spent about 6 hours in the area, just sort of in that morning, maybe 5 hours. But definitely spend way too much time there. And in hindsight, like I said, if you just spend most of your time in that first half of the hike, you'll probably get a lot of awesome shots, and you probably won't miss things if you do what I did by arriving there in the dark, and you miss all these opportunities, which I saw later on social media. But overall, very awesome location, the Quiraing, for drone, for time lapses, for photography. I didn't have the best weather when I was there. It was more cloudy, tiny bit of color in the morning and a tiny bit towards sunset, but overall it wasn't the best. But I can imagine on a nice golden sunrise or sunset, you can get some really awesome shots there, and just definitely a cool area to visit, just exploring around. But like I said, if you're really into doing the hiking thing, you're not there just for photos, do go ahead and do the whole hike. Just be careful when you're coming down the mountain. I slipped on my ass a whole bunch of times and pretty much emerged full of mud everywhere. But you know, that's the joy of hiking, right? Probably the most famous location in the Isle of Skye is the Old Man of Storr. It's actually a series of rock formations. The Old Man is just the most prominent one, I would say. It's about 45 minutes from Broadford, 15 minutes from Portree, so you do get an advantage there. Once you get to the parking lot, it's about a 40 to 60 minute, pretty steep, I would say, hike. It was partially snowing when I was there, so it was partially hiking up in the snow, inclined, slippery, and a little bit tougher than I expected, especially with all the camera gear, but very much worth it. Definitely a sunrise location because it's all exposed to the east. It's on the east coast. And once you get there, actually, you can either shoot from the base of the rock formations, which I missed out on as far as, you know, experimenting with more compositions, because the weather, as I mentioned, it wasn't the best sunrise. So I hiked immediately to this point. I believe there used to be some sort of a castle or something there. Now it's just a kind of flat plain, and from there you get sort of a top-down shot. So it's definitely a composition worth taking, but as I mentioned, you should also make the hike down and just get that classic shot of the Man of Storr. Just more things that I didn't really have time to experiment with, or the motivation, because the weather kind of got cloudy after the sun rose. I did get some really awesome FPV drone shots flying around, zipping around this area, and as I mentioned, it was snowy there when I visited, and actually when I was visiting Mealt Falls later in the trip, a couple days later, driving by, it was actually not snowy at all. So even in the winter, things can be snowy or not snowy, and so in that sense, it's worth visiting some of these locations more than once, though I don't know if I would make that hike twice, because it was quite grueling with all the camera gear. So probably just send the drone from the parking lot, which is what I did with the long distance FPV drones. But Old Man of Storr, definitely a must-see on the Isle of Skye. Very near the Old Man of Storr, just a little bit south down the road, you'll see there's a location called Loch Fada. And what's interesting about this location is that it's across a lake. Loch is the lake, and then there's an additional lake after that. But then in the far distance, you'll see the Old Man of Storr kind of poking out there. So with a telephoto lens, you can get a pretty cool shot. Ideally, you want a nice set of golden clouds or somewhat sunrise going on. Of course, like I said, it went cloudy after the sunrise that I shot. So I took the shot anyways. Nothing too epic about it, but it's definitely a nice little viewpoint. Maybe after you go visit Old Man of Storr, just drive south a little bit and get that shot. It's pretty cool. You get the lake, a little reflection, Old Man of Storr in the distance. So just a little bonus spot. The most popular location on the Isle of Skye as far as sunset is probably the Neist Point Lighthouse. It's an hour and 15 minutes from Broadford, 1 hour from Portree, so it is out there. It's on the west coast, and it's basically a peninsula that juts out with a lighthouse in the distance, and everything lines up to the perfect composition. You got the leading lines. You can use some rocks that are on the cliff by the parking lot, and then the leading line is obviously the peninsula. Lighthouse as your focal point. You can either time it with the light on the lighthouse, or you can just Photoshop it in like I did. You know, nobody really has to know unless they watch this video, right? But very popular location, especially in the summer. Awesome sunset location. But of course, when I visited, it was on that crazy snowy day. I made the drive, kind of just took the risk anyways, even though I didn't really have much hope. And actually, when I arrived, the snow sort of let up just enough for me to get my quote-unquote sunset shot, of which there was no colors at all, but I was able to get sort of a moody composition there. And then actually off to the side, maybe further south, there are some distant cliffs and mountains, and you can work out some compositions there. There's some sheep that kind of hang out, so there's a few things to work with, but definitely the lighthouse is the iconic spot at the Neist Point Lighthouse, as the name implies. So another sunrise location in the Isle of Skye is Mealt Falls / Kilt Rock. It's located about an hour from Broadford and 25 minutes from Portree. So this location is actually the waterfall, which is known as Mealt Falls, and Kilt Rock is the cliff, so named because it's a basalt cliff. And if you know from the Iceland kind of type locations, basalt is a volcanic rock that is sort of geometric, and I guess it looks like a kilt, which is Scottish attire apparently. But this spot, as I mentioned, is good for sunrise. There's a little parking lot there. And the tricky thing is actually getting the shot, because there's a sort of lookout, and if you lean over and you got your camera in a certain angle, you can kind of get the waterfall, but of course this waterfall is going straight into the ocean, so the only real way of getting this, or getting a good composition of this, is with a drone. However, if you visit in the summer or the spring months, you are not allowed to use drones. There's a sign that tells you, and the reason for this is because the birds are nesting. So I got lucky, I guess, because I went in the winter and there wasn't really any birds there, and I put the drone up, got some really awesome shots, a few video shots as well, some FPV stuff as well, and it was one of those sunrises, like as is typical in Scotland, where it kind of comes up through the clouds, you think it's going to be a dud. I put all my camera gear away, and then of course it pops out of the clouds at the top, and I have to bust out all my gear again and pretty much retake all of my sunrise shots. So it's the waterfall, the cliff, nothing much else here, so definitely worth a visit for sunrise, and it's actually kind of near the Old Man of Storr. So an interesting location to visit in the Isle of Skye is Fairy Glen. Now this location is sort of reminiscent of a Dr. Seuss novel. There's these interesting rolling hills, there's a pond, there's a castle-like rock structure, and then there's a strange sort of ring of stones in the grass in this little valley. I didn't really look into why or who created it. It looks like somebody just kind of put it together. But overall, the area is pretty interesting, and you can visit it for sunrise or sunset. It's, as I mentioned, sort of in a valley, so the sun doesn't really hit it directly at any point, but you do have sky visible. So you're kind of going to make your composition, plan your composition accordingly to where the light is. But you can get something interesting with this circle in the grass with the stones and then the rock in the distance. You can even do a selfie. I did one of those standing on the rock. There's going to be people walking around. There actually was a decent amount of people just kind of wandering through, ruining my time lapse as usual. But you can put the drone up and climb some of the rocks and get some interesting kind of selfies if you want there. Nothing too crazy, but just an interesting location to visit. Just park in the parking lot and a short 10-minute walk. But nothing too crazy. Maybe it's worth visiting while you're in the Quiraing area because it's nearby there. It's about 55 minutes from Broadford and 25 minutes from Portree. So wouldn't really go out of my way to visit it, but just like I said, if you're in the area, it's a pretty interesting location. Now, of course, there's a few more locations in the Isle of Skye that you've probably heard of, like the Ferry Pools, Talisker Bay, Sligachan Bridge, some things that I unfortunately didn't have time / the conditions weren't right when I did visit them. When I was trying to make the hike to the Ferry Pools, which is an epic, well, it's a hike and then there's a series of pools, and there's an epic one sort of with the mountain in the distance and a little waterfall and stuff. I'm sure you can Google it. But as I was making the hike, which I hear is about 30 to an hour hike, depending how far you want to go, the wet snow really started coming down, and it just really wasn't worth it at that point. I wouldn't have been able to take a photo. And same thing with the Sligachan Bridge. It was planned on that day that I had the really bad weather. So there were some spots that I did miss, but feel free to do your own research, and there's plenty to see on Isle of Skye for sure. The next region I visited, I don't really know if it has a name, but it's pretty much the northernmost highlands on the sort of peninsula that is Scotland, and you'll find a few locations here. It's obviously very remote. There are towns there, but very small. When I was in this area, I based out of Wick. There's also Thurso, another town. I believe this is where we stayed at the Airbnb, and visited some of the locations here. There's some kind of on the west coast and some a little bit further down, but definitely a few locations to see, so don't overlook this. So actually, as we were leaving Isle of Skye, we visited this location. It's called Clashnessie Falls. It's a 50-foot waterfall, and it's on the west coast. It's about 3 hours from Wick, not really somewhere you're going to be basing out of to visit. I would do it like kind of as I did on the way to or from a location, or a location that you're going to be basing out of. But anyways, this waterfall, you make a drive down this pretty narrow road. I didn't really encounter any cars, but there's plenty of pullouts there. And as you get to the spot where the waterfall is, you'll see some little farmhouses. And the difficulty here is finding somewhere to park, because I didn't really see anywhere official. We just parked at one of the pullouts and then made the little 15-minute walk down to the waterfall. And I would say we got there too late because the sun had dipped way too far and there wasn't really any color left in the sky. So I would probably visit this as maybe a late sunrise or early sunset location if you happen to be in the area. You can get some pretty cool shots, you know, down the river leading up to the waterfall in the distance. That's really the only shot I had time to do. I got a few FPV flights in there. But as I said, I was really rushed for time, so I didn't have the advantage of being able to kind of look around for compositions and see what else I could do there. But definitely a cool little waterfall worth visiting. So about 27 minutes from the town of Wick is a location called the Duncansby Sea Stacks, also known as Duncansby Head. I believe that is the name of the lighthouse there. So as you reach this location, you'll see a parking lot, and then once you park there, it's about a 15-minute walk. Sort of, you'll see the path, depending if you go there too early for sunrise, you might not see it, but you'll see it on the way back. And there's some areas where you'll walk across these planks so that you're not kind of walking in the marshy areas, but you make your way down the coastline, and then off in the distance, as you get closer, you'll see these triangularly shaped sea stacks, very beautiful sea stacks that apparently have been there for thousands of years. I believe there's 3 large ones and then a smaller one on each side, one north, one south. This location is actually good for sunrise or sunset because it's sort of exposed to both sides depending the time of the year that you go there. There's also a lot of birds, and actually shooting this location is kind of tricky because you can get a shot obviously from the cliff, but depending if you go for sunrise or sunset, the sun might be hitting from an opposite direction. So be careful with all the birds there, but put your drone up and you can get a shot facing inland, basically facing the cliffs, and you can get the side that the light is hitting on, and that actually makes for a better drone, makes for a better shot for sunrise, at least when I visited. I also flew my FPV drone around there. There's a little hole in one of the rocks there, and I got some pretty cool shots from my travel video. But it's a pretty cool location, and like I said, it's very close to the town of Wick. Nearby, in sort of the same area, about 10 minutes from Wick, is a pretty awesome castle ruins called Castle Sinclair Girnigoe. Now, as you make your way there, you'll find the parking lot, and then there's a little bit of a 10-minute walk to get to the actual castle, and you can wander around the ruins. There's some signs that show you information about the history of the place, but actually photographing it is a little bit tricky. I was there for sunrise, and with the sun on this side, even if it was sunset, I guess, and the sun was actually on the ocean side, it's kind of tricky to find a good composition there. So I actually only really got some pretty cool drone shots there. Not too many birds, as in the Duncansby Sea Stacks location, but put the drone up and got a variety of angles and then kind of analyze them later and see which one worked out for me. There was a sort of angled one, a little bit of a high, tilted down, slanted angle facing inland that worked out, playing with the shadows and the light there. And then got some cool FPV drone video shots flying around this 14th century bando. I don't know if it was the 15th or 14th century, but it's a pretty cool location, and also really close to the town of Wick. A very large national park area is the Cairngorms National Park. It is sort of in the northeastern part of the Highlands, and it's a very large area filled with some lakes, some lochs, as they say in Scotland. I'll discuss the specific locations in a bit, but overall it's kind of one of those areas that you go to sort of explore. It's kind of forested. You can do some, dense woods photography, maybe if you have some nice sun coming in. Some of the days that I visited, it was very windy and overcast, so I didn't really get anything too amazing in the forests. But it's a sort of choose your own adventure kind of thing. Walk along the hiking trails around the edge of the lake, maybe something with the forest, with the trees, and figure out what to do there. And apparently there's a lot of wildlife, so if you're into that, I believe there's some reindeer out there. I personally didn't encounter any, but Cairngorms is a popular location in the summer. Apparently people go there to enjoy the lake, and if you're visiting this, you could probably base out of Inverness. That's where I based out of, and not too long of drive. I believe it was about 30 minutes average for most of these locations. But pretty cool spot that you should add to your list. The first spot we visited in the Cairngorms National Park was Loch Garten. It's a lake, and unfortunately when we visited, it was extremely windy. I really couldn't put anything together. The mountains in the distance, nothing too epic there. So some of the compositions that I saw as I was doing my research were maybe the kind of lake's edge, and it was actually snowy because I was looking for winter photography, and some snow on the land, and then some trees and some interesting compositions using the edge of the lake. Nothing too long telephoto because the mountains in the distance, like I said, there's not really anything interesting going on there. And then plus it was windy, so I tried to put together some time lapses, and those didn't work out too well. So this is one of those spots where try to do something with the lake, but there's also some hiking paths that go through the woods, and you can kind of come out with something creative there. I flew the FPV drone around there also, but really didn't leave with anything that I particularly liked at this location. Another loch lake in the Cairngorms area is Loch and Eilean. This is a lake that is named for, I believe, this ruined castle that's on an island in the middle of the lake, which is pretty cool, makes for interesting compositions. Good sunrise location. When I visited, it was probably one of the best sunrises of the trip. It was nice and calm. We had colors in the sky. We had some ducks. I didn't really get any photos. I got some video of the ducks, but they came nice and close if you stand still enough. But using the tree roots and some rocks and some of the distant trees and then the colors in the sky, you can find some interesting compositions here, and I very much enjoyed the sunrise here. And then you can actually walk along the edge of the lake and get closer to the castle and try to figure out some things there. I did a couple of drone shots, did some FPV flights, but it was a very peaceful location and very enjoyable for sunrise, and only about 45 minutes from Inverness. About 30 minutes from Inverness is a small town, and in this small town is a very ancient bridge called the Old Packhorse Bridge. Now, I don't know if at any point in history, apart from when it was first made, you could actually walk on this bridge, but you definitely are not allowed to walk on it. It's very narrow, very sketchy, so I wouldn't. But you can get some pretty cool shots. There's a parking lot a little bit down the road, free parking. You walk up to an actual street bridge, take some stairs down, and then by the river you will see the Old Packhorse Bridge, stone bridge, not too far away. And you can actually, if you want to, jump the fence and stand right by the river's edge and use some of the rocks as your foreground. There's really only one composition you can get here with the rocks, the bridge in the distance, maybe a vertical or a landscape. And if you're lucky, you have some light streaming in. It was a little bit overcast when I first got there, but then there was a break in the clouds. We had some sun coming in, sort of sunset, and got some pretty cool shots there, but really it's only that one shot. And I also got a little bit of FPV stuff there, kind of zipping around the lake, zipping around the river. But just, you know, worth visiting and not too far from the Cairngorms area. A little known location on the northern coast is called Bowfiddle Rock. Now, this is about an hour and 30 minutes from Inverness and Aberdeen, which is a large city on the opposite side of the coast, opposite side of Inverness. But those are probably the two biggest cities that are relatively close to this location. But it is an awesome rock formation. Bowfiddle, I guess it's a bow and a fiddle. To me, it looked more like a sort of elephant, not too far away, a little bit in the distance, and then there's some rocks that lead up to it, so it might be better at lower tide, though you can play around with the long exposures as I did, and definitely a sunrise location, which when I visited, it was one of those strange pre-burn sunrises, so we had some nice kind of purplish color in the distance, and that was really only at the beginning of the sunrise, because as soon as the sun got into the clouds, there was really nothing else to work with. So I got those shots at the beginning, got a little time-lapse set up, and got some pretty cool FPV drone shots zipping around here, going through the rock formation. And there's actually a sea cave off to the left that you can kind of enter from the path that goes down to the Bowfiddle Rock. If you'd make a left, you can walk into this cave. Not really sure if it's good for any photos, but it's kind of cool to walk in there. And there's numerous kind of interesting things that I've seen later on social media down the coastline. So don't be hesitant to explore the area. You simply just kind of walk around there. There's a few paths go in different directions. You just park at the end of the road, and it's pretty clear there's a path that leads down to the rock formation itself. But it's a little known location and pretty cool spot to visit for some interesting seascapes. A location that's only about 30 minutes from Glasgow, and I really wasn't sure apart from the photos of the location itself what it would look like, was the Devil's Pulpit, aka Finnich Glen. So Finnich Glen is the actual gorge. Devil's Pulpit is this certain area with a mushroom-shaped rock, popular in a Netflix series called Outlander. There was a scene in an episode that was shot there. And what's cool about this location is that even in the winter, it's sort of bright green mossy walls of this gorge and this red earth, which in turn makes the water red like blood. And as you're walking through this water, it really looks red. It's apparently the iron that's in the mud that makes the water red in turn. But overall, pretty awesome, interesting, kind of eerie location to visit. The tricky part is actually getting to this little area where you find that famous mushroom-shaped rock. So there's a parking lot, you walk through this field, it really doesn't look like you're going anywhere special. Then you get in sort of this wooded area, and then as you look down, you'll see the gorge there. Now, to get to the actual area, the proper way is to go around the gorge and enter from sort of the opposite side of the trail that walks up to it. You'll see some stairs, apparently there's a rope, apparently it's very slippery and a lot of people fall on their ass on their way down there. But you eventually get down to the edge of the river, down the gorge, and then you can wade through the water to get to the mushroom rock area. What I did as we were kind of stomping around exploring the area was I accidentally came down from the opposite side, which you technically can, a little bit sketchy. I had to leave my backpack up there, duck under some roots, and then kind of slide my way down. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to climb back up, but anyways, I got down there on the opposite side of the gorge, or the opposite side of the river, and then took my boots off and waded sort of along the edge because it's too deep in the center, but you can wade along the edge, walk across this tree trunk, which was there at the time. I don't know if it's always there, and then eventually make it to the little area to take the magnificent selfies on the Mushroom Rock. What's funny is that when I was there were some other people who had kind of visited, who gotten there sort of at the same time, a little bit afterwards, and they couldn't figure out how to get to the area because they came down from the stair. So it makes me think that maybe at certain times of the day, I don't know if it's a tide thing, I don't know if it's a rain thing, it might be easier to come down on the wrong side and then walk along the side that I did to get to the area. Regardless, you get there early enough to kind of figure it out. Apparently it's very popular in the summer, like there's people wandering around everywhere. Like I said, when I got there was just the other, maybe 2 or 3 other people who got there, and obviously didn't get to the spot that I got to and got my magnificent selfies, but it's a relatively well-known area, and because it's so close to Glasgow, it's, I guess, very accessible. Additionally, there is an area to the east of the gorge where I almost like the shots I got there better, at least of the gorge themselves. So you kind of walk down the path to the left, through this hole in the fence, down the steep cliff, also take your shoes off, wade through the river, and you kind of have this view of the entrance of the gorge from the east side, and there coincidentally happened to be a large tree trunk there. Like I said, I don't know if that's also there all the time. You get an awesome shot facing into the gorge, the light kind of streaming in, and then you can actually walk a little bit through there also and find some other interesting shots. I found one other composition there. But overall, there's just a lot to explore here. I mean, maybe not a lot to explore, but definitely a bit more to explore than that classic shot if you can get to that area with the Mushroom Rock. But it's a pretty cool location, and really just like you're stepping into a fantasy novel when you get down there, and definitely worth visiting. Now, a great part about visiting Scotland, the UK, these really old countries is the old ruins, castles, some that are restored, some are that are just left to sit there. Driving around the Highlands, we did encounter numerous just kind of ruins sitting there, and some I had time to shoot, some I just didn't because we were just in such a rush with the short days. But one of these that we visited is called Kilchurn Castle. Now this one actually has been restored, so I believe you can tour inside, though it was closed when we got there. There's a parking lot that leads to a path that walks up to the castle, but when we got there the gate was locked, so I didn't really want to hop the gate and get over there. So what we did actually was drive down the road a little bit, and there's a road to the south across from the castle, across the lake, and from there you can walk across this fence. There's some steps and then some sheep, and then you can walk to the lake shore there and get a shot across the lake. If the water is still enough, if there's no wind, you can get a nice little reflection there. You can get a wide shot using some stones like I did, also a telephoto lens, and there's a distant waterfall way behind the castle, so you can kind of line things up and do some interesting things there. Unfortunately, drones are not allowed here. There's a sign, because I guess too many people are flying drones for whatever reason. But regardless, it's an interesting place to visit, not too far away from anything. You could do it when you're on the way up the Highlands or coming back to Glasgow. But definitely one of those castles that are just the iconic kind of Scottish things that you have to visit or pull over when you see it by the road. If you look at Scotland on a map, you will see that there are numerous other islands. There's the Isle of Lewis, the Outer Hebrides. There's just like a whole bunch of areas that you need to take a ferry to get to, which unfortunately is not very easy to do in the winter. It's a very limited schedule, some not running at all. So in the limited number of days that I was there, in the limited time, it really didn't work out to spend too much time. Like on the Isle of Lewis, I had some plans to visit it, but I would miss a day and a half in each direction just because of the ferry schedule. But if you are in the area for more time, definitely worth visiting these locations. You'll find some other kind of cool coastal rock formations, castle ruins. There's so much to see there. It's definitely worth making another trip. But just keep in mind that I didn't really cover every single location that's worth visiting in the Scotland Highlands. So that is a wrap for this location guide of amazing Scotland, the Scotland Highlands, the land of brave hearts. You know, if you're a fan of these movies, I would recommend maybe watching some of these movies before you visit to just get some inspiration, just some of the kinds of things that you'll see out there and just some ideas for compositions. But it kind of reminded me of the Pacific Northwest with the variety that it had, because it had the coastlines, the waterfalls, the lakes, the mountains, just so much to see out there, the valleys. So definitely spend a good amount of time while you're there and just kind of like maybe drive around in a camper van or something, because there's so much to see. And maybe on the shoulder months, as I mentioned, spring or fall, not exactly in the summer. So it's definitely a landscape photographer's playground, definitely worth a trip. Be sure to check out some of my behind the scenes vlogs for more real-time kind of location stuff. Also the Scotland travel film with some epic FPV, cruising around, mountain surfing, all these amazing locations. Be sure to like and subscribe for more of this type of travel content, and I will see you on the next one.